So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. That if it doesn't affect their well-being, so dementia patients that don't know who they are or where they're from, can we execute dementia patients because they're confused about their well-being?
Can you imagine a scenario?
Or Alzheimer's patients.
Charlie,
Alzheimer's patients don't really know much about anything.
What happens when a confident medical student steps up to challenge Charlie Kirk on the issue of abortion? At first, the conversation leans on science, quickly shifts into questions of morality, and ultimately unravels under the weight of its own contradictions. This isn't just a debate over policy. It's a collision of two very different worldviews, each exposing the weaknesses of the other. Viewers aren't just watching an argument. They're watching a live test of logic, values, and conviction.
All right, so thank you for coming, Charlie. My question to you, I'm a medical student, and I'm going to throw out the big A word. I know you get asked about it a lot, but I want to hear from you what your opinion is on abortion.
Life begins at conception.
But about abortion specifically, why do you think abortion's wrong specifically?
Well, you agree is wrong?
I agree. Okay, so this is where we get to the question, right? Because what is it about murder you say is wrong? Like, why is murder wrong?
Well, because it's a human being, not just because it has consciousness or because it's of a certain age, because it's a human.
Well, what is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know that. I can imagine it because it is a human being, because that has a soul.
And what is this soul? Where does this come from? This idea that it's...
Exactly. Again, the Greeks postulated that it is the entirety of your being. Okay, you guys can laugh. It's true. Every civilization has had a different belief, but agreed upon ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West and what the birth certificate of my country articulates, that every human being is more than just matter, it's more than just a clump of cells, but it also has an invisible element to you that will live beyond you.
Fine, so, can you say that comes from the Bible, or where else do you get that from?
Ethical monotheism, which is the creed of the West. And again, the Declaration of Independence mentions God 4 times. The founders were explicitly believed not in a secular morality, but a divinely given one, of at least this idea that there is a God and you are not him. And let me ask you, what is the first stage of human development?
So this is the thing, right? We can take it from the sperm being generated in the father and the oocyte being generated in the mother, right? They fuse at conception. The only thing that happens at conception is these 2 cells fuse.
Right? No, DNA is created. A zygote.
DNA is not created.
No, that's not true. The DNA coding at the zygote. Hold on, time out.
Let me finish.
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Charlie,
does a zygote have a unique marker?
You have to let me speak. You have to
answer it, yes or no. Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Define a unique marker.
Meaning, can you differentiate the DNA coding between the mother and the zygote if you examine it under a deoxyribonucleic acid analysis? Can you?
Only purely because the addition comes from the father.
Oh, so it is something different.
Charlie, DNA...
The student kicks things off by leaning on his credentials. He's in medical school, so the assumption is that he must have the upper hand. But the confidence doesn't last long. Almost immediately, Charlie Kirk puts a direct question on the table. When does life begin? From that moment, the ground shifts. Instead of relying on science, the student begins sidestepping, trying to dodge the core issue. He struggles to explain how human DNA can exist without acknowledging human value. And the more he avoids the answer, the more obvious the cracks in his argument become.
Created. DNA is not created. You have, the father has his own genome, the mother has her own genome. They fuse. This is why you have the same characteristics, similar ones to your mother, similar ones to your father. That's why you have similar characteristics to your siblings. DNA is not created, right? So when you ask me, where does a human being come from? I can say to you, it starts at conception, but all conception is these 2 cells joining, right? But these 2 cells were created, the mother's cells were created long before, they were created when she was a fetus. So there's DNA being produced, right? So we can't establish, the only thing that happens at conception is these 2 cells fuse. Now this idea that means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these 2 cells who had half the DNA, but suddenly there's a
correct, yes, something magical happens at that.
It's not magical, Charlie, we know about this.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out, hold on.
I promise you, I'm not trying to score points. I'm not trying to score points on you. This is genuinely...
We call it the miracle of life for a reason. We've not been able to yet replicate human life development outside of the womb.
We call it the miracle of life because, yes, it's something beautiful, the ability to
exactly.
form
magical.
It's not... You say magical as in, oh, it's beautiful, it's an incredible thing that happens, of course. But it's not incredible in the sense we don't know what's going on. There's no new DNA coming out of nowhere.
Hold on, but time out. Isn't there a separate DNA, though, than the mother?
Yes, from the father.
Okay, yes, but it's not the father's DNA either. A new coding is created.
Charlie,
you are a blend of the two. And so when did your life begin?
Okay, so
when did your life begin?
I mean, again, this comes from what you define as where life starts. You can say life starts at conception, but I'm telling you, I believe that's just an arbitrary point, right? That's just the moment these two cells fuse. Now, you say about this mother thing. So the way DNA is in a cell is it's arranged in chromosomes. Chromosomes are paired up, so you have one from the mother, one from the father, typically, in a healthy individual, right? Now, you can take those maternal chromosomes out and you can find that this is who the person's mother is, and you can do the same with the father. Now, the reason you are different to your mother and father is because some of those chromosomes express genes that are different from each other, and so those genes interact, and that's what gives rise to you, right? But there's no space for any kind of moral framework to come into that until you consider that a human being is capable of consciousness and of suffering. But if you take that out of the equation, the fact that these two DNA, whatever they call molecules, right? These two DNA molecules are fusing, that does not suddenly flip a switch that attributes moral worth to that individual.
By the closing moments, the student reaches for a philosophical last resort, arguing that morality itself is entirely subjective, shaped by opinions, pain levels, and personal perspective. It's a Hail Mary attempt to salvage the argument, but it only exposes the deeper problem. Charlie Kirk zeroes in on the flaw. If human value isn't grounded in something solid and universal, then anything can be justified under the right circumstances. And that's the heart of the debate. It's not simply about science or feelings. It's about whether life has inherent worth or whether it shifts with convenience.
I'm just saying, I'm not trying to score points.
Right,
I'm trying to understand.
By what moral standard do you believe that?
I believe that if an individual is capable of suffering, then it's wrong. Now, can I explain my opinion on abortion, just so you can understand? I would agree, as many reasonable people would, that at 9 months, it's unreasonable to expect someone to get an abortion, right? Unless you have some extreme circumstances. But for an elective abortion seems a bit radical to me. But it also seems radical to say that a woman who has just, the cells have just fused, to deny her of an abortion also seems wrong to me. Because that zygote is not capable of suffering, as far as we know.
So by what moral standard? Is that just your opinion? Where did you get that moral standard from?
Because suffering is a bad thing. We all know suffering is a bad thing. That's an objective fact, right?
Well, hold on. So you do believe in objective morality?
I believe that suffering is an objectively negative
So if you can't feel it, is it okay?
What do you mean if you can't?
You can't feel the pain, is it okay to inflict the pain?
In the sense that if no one's suffering from it, if you have a scenario where nobody is suffering from something, then yes, of course. Something is only a moral question if it affects someone's well-being.
Oh, so let me just make sure I understand this correctly. That if it doesn't affect their well-being, so dementia patients that don't know who they are or where they're from, can we execute dementia patients because they're confused about their well-being?
Can you imagine a scenario?
Or Alzheimer's patients.
Charlie,
Alzheimer's patients don't really know much about anything. Can we schedule them for execution because they can't technically suffer?
I'll respond. So can you imagine a scenario where we lived in a society where we killed people when they suffered from dementia, were incapable of suffering, and we killed them, right? It's not a scenario that involves an absence of suffering. There's still suffering involved. Imagine you grow up thinking, my dad could be killed at any moment because he's going to get dementia. Imagine living your life thinking, I could get dementia and suddenly I'd be killed by my state.
Imagine a world where you slaughter 1 million babies every year in America.
Charlie.
Let's step back and unpack what played out in those clips, and more importantly, why it matters. At the heart of the exchange was a seemingly simple but deeply profound question. When does human life begin, and when does it carry moral worth? Charlie Kirk drew a firm line that never wavered. Both life and moral value began at conception. For him, that stance isn't just an opinion. It's a view grounded in biology, ethics, and centuries of philosophical tradition. The student, on the other hand, offered a looser standard. In his view, moral significance begins only when a human being can experience suffering. That's where the cracks begin to show. Kirk's strategy wasn't merely to defend the pro-life position, it was to demand consistency. If suffering alone decides who deserves protection, then what about a newborn who isn't yet aware of its world? What about a patient with Alzheimer's, or someone lying unconscious in a hospital bed? By that reasoning, their lives would lose value too. The student hesitated, tried to reframe, but never gave a real answer. And that silence spoke volumes. Another layer worth examining is the science itself. The student, despite his medical training, downplayed conception as nothing more than cells coming together. But Kirk stayed focused on the biological reality. The moment sperm meets egg, a brand new genetic code is formed. It's not the mother's, not the father's, but a unique human blueprint, complete, distinct, and irreplaceable. The facts don't bend, no matter how much the language does. That led to another tactic, word games. The student leaned on clinical terms like zygote and fetus, as if changing vocabulary could lessen the moral weight. But Kirk cut straight through, pointing out that fetus literally translates to offspring in Latin. In other words, it's just another word for baby. Shifting language doesn't erase reality. It only hides it behind sterile terminology. And in exposing that, Kirk showed how much of the pro-choice argument relies on distancing people emotionally from what abortion really is. Perhaps the most striking and troubling moment came when the student admitted he views morality almost entirely through the lens of suffering. If there's no pain, then in his mind, there's no problem. It sounds neat in theory, but Kirk pressed it further. What about painless euthanasia of the elderly? What about people born without the ability to feel pain? What about atrocities carried out without visible suffering? Once morality is reduced to feelings, there are no safeguards left. Everything becomes negotiable. The student tried to regroup by offering what he thought was a middle ground. No late-term abortions, but allowance in the early stages. Yet even that position wasn't built on science or ethics. It was built on personal opinion about suffering. The problem with that approach is clear. Once you make human value conditional, the line keeps moving. For one person, it may be 6 months. For another, 3. And for some, as extreme voices have even argued, the line could extend beyond birth. That's the danger of relativism. Once the principle is compromised, there's no